Hello, everybody. Today's guest is Cory Levin, and Cory is a registered dietitian, women's nutritional expert, and a personal chef. Hi, Cory. How are you doing?
Hi, good. How are you?
I'm doing good. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, happy to.
All right. So before we get into, talking about all things restrictive eating and food intolerances and recovering from, restrictive eating and also hypothalamic amenorrhea, let me just real quick introduce you to our listeners. So Cory has been in the food industry for over 10 years now, and she specializes in hormone health, fertility, weight management, and digestion. Using science-backed research and proven nutrition therapy techniques, she helps women ditch the yo-yo diet cycle and replace it with a lifelong, nourishing self-care plan. She's currently accepting new patients in her virtual private practice. So that's awesome. So let's first talk about a little bit, how did you get into dietetics?
Yeah, sure. After college, I had no idea what I wanted to do. And so I started to, I'd been working in restaurants for a while and bakeries and things like that. And then I started to take some science classes, and I really fell in love with science. And I was working at the restaurant at the time, and I thought about two things. I thought about culinary school because I just love cooking, love being in that atmosphere. And then I thought about medical school because I really love science, and I knew that I wanted a higher degree. And then I thought, how do I combine the two? And so I chose nutrition and dietetics. And I kind of mapped out the plan for what I needed to get there. And I just went for it.
So I know that at some point you actually, your relationship with food wasn't the best it could be. So why don't you tell us more about that?
Yeah, I think it's kind of a common theme in nutrition to find that people tend to gravitate towards studying nutrition once they go through something like that. And I think in the end it makes me a better practitioner and healthcare provider, because I can oftentimes relate to a lot of the struggles that my clients have faced or are currently facing. So when I was starting to get into nutrition, I'm very much somebody who goes all in or not at all. So I started going researching really heavily into nutrition and different diets. I'd never done a diet before. I'd never changed the way I'd eaten. So I kind of came across the vegan diet, and I got really into it. And I started to calculate what I thought was how many calories I needed in a day to eat. And it turns out that I was way off. And I started losing weight really quickly, which I really liked at the time, because I had put on quite a bit of weight in college, just, through less than stellar health habits. And I was also on hormonal birth control for a long time. And I think that kind of, for me personally, contributed to some of my appetite and weight changes. And just in college, drinking a lot, eating a ton of things. And so, I lost a lot of weight, and I started exercising. My dad bought me a road bicycle, and I got really, really into that. I was logging a ton of miles every day, and I loved the endorphin rush and just the way that my body was changing in a way that I had never seen it before. And I think a lot of the comments that I would get from people kind of perpetuated the cycle, because I probably lost about 35, maybe even 40 pounds. So it was a big change for me. So I started kind of getting really into that.
So you said that you found like the number of calories that you thought you should be eating. So how did you figure this number out, and how can you now, looking back, say that it was not enough? How do you know that?
Right. So I was plugging it into a little calculator online. You would type in your height, your weight, your gender, your age, I think, and how many pounds you want to lose and how quickly. And I was always clicking, I want to lose the most weight the fastest, right? So I was going to the absolute lowest. And I think the number spit out like under 1,000 calories. I think I was at like 900, and I had no basis, I had no background in any of this. Is before I had started my nutrition classes. So I started going by that number and kind of tracking through MyFitnessPal. And I just got really, really, for lack of a better word, obsessed with staying even under that number. And doing that while eating a vegan diet. And I was basically cutting out all fats. So I was not eating any oil, any fat. I thought that I had on Dr. Google, I had, this is where research, is just really comes into play here, and how important it is to understand research and understand that it's super important to work with a professional who knows what they're doing, because if you're just kind of flying blind, you have no clue. And I ended up doing a lot of harm to my body by doing that. So, and I think I wasn't taking into account the activity factor, right? So the fact that that's how many calories my body might need if I was just lying in bed like a corpse all day and not going around and walking around and interacting and, on my feet at my job and in exercising. So way, way, way under.
900 calories, it's so hard for me to even imagine. Like it's really, really low. So how long were you able to maintain, like keep that number that low?
I mean, give or take, it wasn't 900 every day. Probably it was probably under some and probably over some days. I want to say like almost a year. And I got kind of to a point where I don't think I could have lost any more weight without really, really, really being ill. But it was hard because for me, my body's natural weight point is pretty, average, I guess. So for me to lose 35 pounds doesn't put me in a range where I look sick and where people were to come to me and say, oh my gosh, what's going on? Like, you should probably seek help. I looked just like a normal, thinner person. So I never thought that I was doing anything wrong. I never thought that was a bad thing for me.
That's really, really common. I feel like, if you don't, people think that people who have eating disorder must look sick. They must look really malnourished, but a lot of them don't. While there can be some serious issues going on still. So what were your symptoms? What did you experience? Like negative symptoms?
Yeah, negative symptoms. I started getting sleep disturbances. I couldn't sleep for more than 4 hours. I had super, super high energy. Just, I think my body was just kind of in fight or flight mode. And I lost my period. And I lost my period for about 8 months. So it took a few months for it to disappear, but it took me 8 months to even realize that it had really was gone. And I needed to do something about that. And so I kind of started to research. I was really worried, I didn't even think that it was connected to diet and exercise. I was scared that something else was happening. So I was, trying to, being the research nerd that I am, trying to look up everything I could and learn everything I could. And I was lost because everything I saw said, for a person to have disordered eating or just eating disorder, you have to be, have a BMI of, under whatever. And I still had a normal BMI, and I didn't look, sick or ill. So I had a hard time realizing that was actually what was going on, and that I was really going through and had hypothalamic amenorrhea.
That's so true. Like, so many people think they can't have HA, hypothalamic amenorrhea, if they are not underweight. But yeah, like both of us, we are example of how, we had normal weights. I was never underweight either, like according to the BMI chart, but was underweight for my body, and that was enough for me to lose my period in year 2, the same thing. So
Exactly.
then at one point you realize that you have to do something about it. And so where was this kind of like tipping point where you realized that, okay, something's wrong, not only related regarding the period, but otherwise too?
For me, it was actually mainly the fact that my period had disappeared. I I knew that one day I wanted to start, be a mom at some point, in the future. And I knew that without having a normal menstrual cycle, that wouldn't be a reality. And I was scared. It scared me. So actually, that was my number one priority, was to get my period back.
Okay.
Yeah.
And once you did that, did some of the other symptoms also disappear?
Yeah. My sleep, well, it was a very long road. It wasn't, it's not like you can just stop doing what you're doing and everything becomes normal and stabilizes. It's something that you truly have to work for, and you have to fight for sometimes, and you have to give up a lot of it's a mental battle as well. You have to give up the notion and the belief, and that your weight is what is your top indicator of health, and your weight is the number one most important thing about you, and that people are going to judge you, and you're no longer going to have this amazing body. And it's all of that is something that you have to work through mentally, and get over that hurdle as well. And that's I would argue the hardest part, to kind of accept your body and learn to be at peace with your body, and that does not happen overnight.
Yeah.
And the other thing that I really experienced, that I once I started to know that I had to go down this path, and I had to stop what I was doing, and I had to eat differently, stop exercising as much. I realized that, and I read that people had experienced some digestive discomfort. And before that, I never had any digestion problems. I could eat anything, whatever, no problem. I didn't even think about it. And after I started to really go, what I say, all in, and really give up the food restriction and the exercising, and I started to have digestive problems that really impacted me in a negative way.
Yeah, that's a big topic that I wanted to talk to you about. So yeah, so you mean that before you went vegan, before you were able to eat everything, and then after this hard, heavy restriction, your body wasn't tolerating foods anymore. So can you tell us what's the science behind it?
Yeah, so there's different things going on. When your body's in a period of restriction, your metabolism is slowed. And sometimes that causes what's called gastroparesis. And it's actually like a slowing of the digestion of food moving through. So it causes a lot of digestive symptoms, gas, bloating, abdominal cramps, nausea, constipation, even diarrhea, just things like that you can experience, just simply due to the slowing of that whole system. And when you start feeding it again, your body and your digestion, it's kind of like in shock in a way. And it's that slow pace is going to be kind of exacerbated by you trying to refeed and put more food into your belly, into your digestive system. And so that causes a lot of digestion problems in the beginning. And also when you're in a period of restriction, you're a lot of times you have a lack of variety in your diet. You're kind of eating the safe foods, eating the same things. And that actually causes changes to your microbiome. And I'll talk a little bit about that too, for people that are kind of newly discovering what that is, and how that is super, super important to digestion. And when my internet might be kind of cutting out. And when your body tries to stabilize, you're probably going to gain some water weight. And that can be uncomfortable, especially if you see the scale going up, which kind of also plays into the mental aspect of this. You're refeeding yourself and putting yourself back in the kind of normal eating patterns is going to cause some anxiety. And when you're stressed and you're feeling anxious, your digestion usually goes a little bit wonky, because you're just feeling all of that kind of fight or flight response and stress. So following these long periods of restrictive eating, your body is going to react unfavorably when you try to refeed it like normal. And these a lot of times present as IBS or food intolerances or food insensitivities, food
Mhm.
sensitivities.
Okay, you just covered so many common things that I'm talking about with my clients who are like, I can't start my AJ recovery because when I eat this food, it's bad for me. First of all, there's this mentality that it's bad because that's what the diet industry tells us. There's always a thing that's bad for you, right? Like, oh, you can't have gluten, can't have dairy, and some people really can't. But then, yeah, then the other thing is that they actually do get symptoms and issues. So how would you start dealing with them? What would you do if there's somebody who starts to introduce more foods, more normal foods, and is getting all sorts of stomach issues?
Mm-hmm. A lot of times the digestive issues are simply, unfortunately, unavoidable. You're going to have to kind of feel a little bit of discomfort, but it's temporary. And it's something that you have to realize is part of your recovery process because your body is healing. And before we kind of go into that, I just wanted to quickly talk about the microbiome and kind of what that is and why it's important. Because for me, it was a major turning point in integrating that into my practice with clients and kind of helping them understand the role that it plays. And then how you can tweak that in order to help all the symptoms during your recovery. So the microbiome is made up of about 100 trillion microbes, and they weigh up to 5 pounds inside your body of basically this bacteria. And the bacteria has so many purposes. It helps regulate your immune system. It helps synthesize certain vitamins, and it also helps you digest the food that you eat. So with your microbiome, you have all this bacteria. You have good bacteria, and you have this kind of quote bad bacteria. And so when you're feeding your body, when you're not feeding your body a variety of foods, you're going to actually lose some of that good bacteria because you're not feeding it correctly. And so with digestion, the more diverse your diet, the more diverse the microbiome and the more adaptable it will be in times of change and in times of stress, and in this case, variety for recovery. So you really want to make sure that when you're in a restrictive period and you are coming out of that, you really want to focus on building up the good bacteria in your gut, because that's going to help you be able to digest the food that you're going to be feeding it. So that's a major point of focus. So generally speaking, a more diverse microbiota is considered to be a healthy one. And the more species of bacteria you have, because they all do different things, the greater number of health benefits that you'll be able to get from those. So a lot of times the microbiome is something that you want to focus on in terms of refeeding. And after periods of restriction, you want to make sure that you're actually supplementing or eating the right foods in order to feed the beneficial bacteria, so that they can actually help you digest your food. And there's different ways to go about that. But for IBS and food intolerances and all of these symptoms that we experience in periods of recovery, my best advice is don't stop eating those foods. Eating those foods is only going to stop. Not eating those foods is just going to keep perpetuating the issue, and you're never going to be able to digest them correctly. And the goal of all of this is to be able to, continue to eat normally, and to continue to be able to enjoy eating experiences and have a more normal relationship with food and your body and health in general. So keeping on restricting those foods, and and kind of thinking that what's causing all of the distress is only a very small part of the puzzle in reality. Because they can be super uncomfortable, but these symptoms are temporary and they're not going to last forever. So it's not that this food is making you feel bloated or foggy brained or whatever symptom you think it's having. It's because your body doesn't know what to do with it. It doesn't know how to digest it, and you kind of have to reteach and your body has to relearn how to digest these foods. But you can eat them again. You don't have to avoid, soybean oil or whatever forever. You can eat normally again, and you have to work at it, and you have to work with a professional who knows what they're doing and is able to guide you into the correct plan so that eventually you can have these foods again.
That all makes so much sense that, if you don't eat those foods, your body can't tolerate it. That's basically how it is, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
this information is so valuable. And I really hope, people go back and listen to it one more time, because it's not that, there are people with like actual real intolerances. Maybe they were born with it, or
Absolutely.
maybe they developed it later. But I feel like a huge proportion of those people who say that they have this and that, and they actually don't a lot of times. And what's
Right.
even more is that a lot of times we come up with these things because they are a good excuse to go on another diet, right?
Exactly. Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. Yeah, it actually is kind of a gateway to further restrictive or disordered eating patterns.
Yeah.
And so true.
So what do you think, as a dietitian, a professional? So are there actually some foods or food groups that tend to be more inflammatory and people would benefit from limiting them? What do you think?
Um, Unless you have, I honestly believe that unless you have a medical need to avoid a certain food, so that would be, gluten for celiac disease, or if you're lactose intolerant, which means you actually lack the ability to digest lactose, then you can eat these foods again. And so it's kind of it's different for everybody, but it's starting low and slow. It's taking your time. It's introducing and reintroducing food slowly, in small amounts, and kind of building up a tolerance in your body. And, the certain side effects that pop up from that, they're inevitable, but working with somebody who, again, is a professional and knows how to guide you into your however you are trying to heal, is super vital. And they're going to be able to steer you in a direction that helps you minimize the symptoms and the side effects as much as possible.
Mm-hmm.
So
Is
I
that
think of it,
something? Yeah, go ahead.
go ahead.
Is
No,
that
go
something
ahead.
that you work with your clients as well? So if there's somebody who is with
Mhm.
exactly these problems, they can reach out to you and get help from you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay,
Mm-hmm.
that's great.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so what is your take on current popular diets, such as, right now it's keto. I don't know, somebody watches 5 years from now, they're like, keto, I don't know what that
What's
is.
keto?
What's keto? Because by then there's going to be another one. And then 5 years ago, everybody would have asked about paleo. So what's your take
I
on
know.
diets like that come and go and come and go? What do you think?
I know, it's, yeah, there's like you said, there's always something, in the 90s it was avoiding fat, and now we know that was so incorrect. Nutrition is complex, and it's nuanced, and I totally understand how it can be very confusing and very easy to just hop on a certain diet train because it's trendy. But like I said earlier, unless you have a medical need to avoid something like carbohydrates, this diet then is not right for you. For keto diet, carbohydrates are essential to our health, especially as women. They fuel us, they fuel our movements, our brain. Cutting them out completely is just setting you up for nutritional inadequacies, and maybe quite possibly an eating disorder eating patterns in the future, digestive problems, intolerances, all these kinds of future issues. So I'm really for balance, and nutrition is constantly evolving. It is a science, so we're always coming up with always coming out with new research, and that's why I like to really stay current on all of the research and really use it to guide my practice. But yeah, popular diets are going to be around forever. they've been around forever. I mean, in the 1900s, there was like a tapeworm diet where you'd eat a tapeworm and like lose weight. I mean, it's crazy. There's always something coming out. So I'm not, it's something that as a healthcare provider, I have to fight against for the rest of my career, but bring it on. I'm ready.
That's so cool. So you probably don't have things like diet, like eating rules, because or eating, I don't know, you have to do like this and that to be healthy. I'm guessing you don't have very strict rules, but you probably have some like guidelines, like how you eat yourself and what do you see like works for most people? What do most people need when it comes to proper diets?
That's the $1 million question as a healthcare provider. And I always, I emphasize when it comes to diets, just like clothing, there's no one size fits all approach. And working with someone in the nutrition field, they can help you customize your eating patterns and individualize your diet based on your specific needs. So I always say that I'm the biggest fan of balance, and going to one extreme is never sustainable in the long run. And a lot of these, like the fad diets, and they're just going to set you up for failure. And so rather than rules, I like to work around lifestyle changes and making sustainable changes in the long run.
Mm-hmm. So what part stress plays in all that? Life stress.
Ooh,
Yes.
good question. Life stress is one of those things that impacts every part of your body and your brain more than we realize. And a lot of times your body has what's called perceived stress. So that's like, I would say, food restriction. Even if you're not physically losing weight, the fact that you're restricting, it puts a perceived stress on your brain. And all of these are things that can affect your digest. I'm having a really hard time saying that word today. Digestion, and your menstrual cycle and your hormone balance, and your weight too. So stress is super important, and that's something that I always factor into the equation when I'm coming up with a care plan for somebody.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of times people they may be doing everything so right, and I put right in quotes, because they eat like according to the plan they were given, or maybe they put it together themselves, but just the fact that they get so freaked out if they ate like 20 grams less protein that they were supposed to, and 20 grams more carbs that they were supposed to, then I feel like this fact alone can cause people so much stress, especially if they're like type A people who have to have everything perfect. And if they don't do it perfectly, then they just freak out. And I don't think that, sitting down to a meal like in this like freaked out like situation is can ever be good for you. And you're better off eating your food freely and relaxing and enjoying it. And it's probably better for your body and your mind.
Absolutely. Yeah. I had a client who was literally paralyzed in front of the refrigerator because she didn't know. She had all these diet rules in her head, like, I can't eat this, I can't eat that, I'm supposed to only eat 20 grams of this, and I'm only supposed to have 15 grams of that, and was just physically paralyzed in front of the refrigerator trying to make a choice. So it's, the problem with, all of the kind of eating clean and all of those ideas is that it kind of sucks the joy out of eating and the joy out of our food. And also there's so much, food is more than just nourishment. It's social, it's cultural. And so all these rules just kind of kind of help make those disappear. And so if you're stuck on the eating clean, you're kind of no longer able to enjoy that small slice of pie at Thanksgiving or a piece of birthday cake, and that's what keeps our lives happy and feeling, fulfilled, and makes us feel connected. So that's kind of one extreme that I tend to stay away from also. And along with the extreme of eat anything you want, with exception of, when you're coming into a recovery period, that's kind of a different different world. But as far as people who are not going through an active recovery, it's about striking a balance, really, again.
Yeah, I know. Balance is actually what works, but it's the thing that's not very popular because people like, I mean, you and I, we could both give people, you could give them like restrictive diet plans and have somebody lose weight quickly, and I can put them on crazy workout routines and have them lose weight, but that's not a responsible thing to do. It's very irresponsible thing to do, I feel like. So you talked about clean eating and as being like one side of the spectrum, and then the other end of the spectrum would be like eat anything you want. And I see both of them in social media, right? There's like people who post only their like kale smoothies and broccoli, and then others who are like eat all the pizza and ice cream, doesn't matter, like eat what you like and eat what you want. So that's going to be a heavy question. I know, a big question, but how do you find balance there? Where would you start if there is somebody who's, you know, maybe restricted heavily and now it's like at the other end of the spectrum, doesn't know how to get back to normal eating? What would be the first steps to take?
So I am a huge proponent of what's called intuitive eating, and you know, it's become very popular in recent years, and for good reason. It's an amazing tool to discover how to balance on your own. So it's kind of it's learning how to tune into your own body, your hunger, your fullness signals, and figuring out what works best for you and your own body as far as balancing. And really starting to listen to what your body wants and needs. So that's one approach that that I am a huge believer in, and I use in my practice as well. So I would probably start there with intuitive eating.
Yeah, and there's a book written on that if anyone wants to check that out, that explains it in a big detail, and also a workbook. It's called exactly Intuitive Eating, so you can take a look at that. One more thing I wanted to ask you regarding restricting, and then, you know, a lot of us get to the point where we can no longer restrict, or we realize that we have to start eating normally in order to get our periods back, or just to start feeling our body. And then we find that we just can't stop eating. So what's the deal there? Why does it all of a sudden happen that we were able to restrict everything so well, and now we just can't keep our hands off the peanut butter jar or whatever and want to eat the entire thing? So what's happening there?
Yeah, it's actually it's a basic human trait. When you restrict something, you are going to want it more. When you can't have something, you're going to want it more. And so when you all of a sudden, quote, allow yourself to eat these things, you're probably going to go ham for a little bit because you haven't been able to for so long. And that's normal. And I want to normalize that 100%. It's not something to be ashamed of. It's not something to feel guilty about, because it's a normal human process, and our bodies, all of them, were built that way. And there's been so many scientific research studies that have proven that time and time again. So what I always emphasize is that, you know, it's to accept that part and that it is temporary, and your body is incredibly amazing at stabilizing itself and coming back into a state of what's called, you know, homeostasis, balance. And so it's going to find that again. You just have to let it get there first, and accept that these feelings and these urges are completely normal, and they you're not going to feel that way forever.
Right. But it can take time. I think it can take, you know, it's not going to be a couple of weeks. It's going to be more than that. It's going to be maybe half a year or so, I would think, or even a little bit more. It depends on the person. And a lot of times a lot of times you actually are physically full already, and you know that you have had a lot of calories, but you still have this urge to keep eating. So do you have an explanation, like why does that happen? Why does that happen? Do you know?
From a physiological standpoint, it's probably what you mentioned. And from a mental standpoint, it's probably the scarcity factor. So like I mentioned, the idea that what I didn't have before, I suddenly have. So I'm going to take full advantage of that. So it's also a mental, it's something mental as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Is there anything that I didn't touch, but you would like to talk a little bit more about regarding
Oh man, I
restrictive
think we
eating?
covered a
Yeah, I
lot.
think we did.
Yeah. No, I guess just, takeaway points. And I'm sure you'll kind of sum them up, but, to kind of, I had a really good analogy with digestion. Well, I don't know if it's a good one, but I thought it was good at the time. So, your body was at one time a really great athlete when it came to eating. It was a superstar at eating all different kinds of food and digesting them. And then while you were restricting your food intake and maybe going through hypothalamic amenorrhea, your body went through a series of serious sports injuries, and it hasn't played in a long time. And the body needs time to rehab and practice in order to become an Olympian again. And eating is the practice, and you have to keep practicing.
This is so cool. I love it so much. Thank you for this.
Yeah.
So before we finish, I have a couple of kind of lighter, more fun questions for you. So are you ready?
Sure.
Okay, so how about name 1, 2, 3 diet myths that you wish died for good?
um, I think first and foremost, just because it's so trendy right now, is the ketogenic diet for weight loss. Actually, the ketogenic diet has some proven benefits for people that are have chronic seizures. So it's actually it actually is a helpful diet for them. But as far as weight loss, it's something that I've never been able to get behind, and I likely never will. Your body, carbohydrates are essential, and not giving your body carbohydrates is probably one of the worst things you can do. And I urge anybody who is looking into the ketogenic diet to consider, the implications that it has.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, do you
And
know,
I
by
can
the
go
way,
into a whole video on that.
yes, maybe to part 2 on ketogenic diet. But
Yeah. Yeah.
how did it go from, okay, yeah, I know it's helpful for like epilepsy patients and kids. How did it go from there to like a mainstream thing? Do you know that, like the storyline or the history? How did it happen?
Good question.
Was it just,
I don't know, but I can take a guess that maybe it kind of gained momentum with the whole gluten-free, low carbohydrate, because low carb and gluten-free, because I think was kind of on the scene before keto, I think. And then keto kind of, I think, was maybe popularized by that because it is a form of extreme low carbohydrate intake.
yeah.
And if you're not really eating very much gluten if you're ketogenic, so maybe that, but I'm not sure. I don't know the history exactly.
Yeah, it's just
Now I want to know. Now I'm gonna look it up.
yeah, it just blows my mind how something such like narrow, such a small thing, like patients with epilepsy. I think this is where it started. Like, yeah, it's good for
Yep.
them, but why is it that now we all have to do it? It's totally insane.
No, there's two more that I have.
Okay, yeah, please.
Two more diet myths that I have. One of them is don't eat before bed because you're not going to digest it. That's absolutely incorrect. Your body is going to keep digesting food whether or not you like it. So if you want to eat a snack before bed and you're hungry, eat the snack and go to bed and have a nice rest. And then the other one that I used to hear a lot is if you're hungry, eat an apple. If you're hungry, if you're hungry, eat an apple, and if you don't want the apple, then you're probably not hungry. And that's one of the weirdest, worst. And it's so popular. Like even in school, I learned, and I was like, maybe you don't want the apple. Maybe you don't want an apple. Maybe you want like a fudge brownie. I don't know. But tuning into your hunger and fullness cues is much more helpful than trying to figure out if you want an apple or not. So anyways,
This
I
is
had to say that one.
I've never heard that one.
Yeah.
I have practiced it
Oh,
though.
really?
Oh yeah, but I didn't know that I was doing something cool at the time. Yeah, when I was doing Weight Watchers, that was my go-to. Either an apple or Coke Zero or like black coffee. But
Oh yeah.
hey, that was
And
12 years
coffee, I
ago.
mean, yeah.
Yeah, none of them has like high nutritional value. So, I mean, apples obviously do, but not like when you're actually hungry.
Right.
Okay, and then describe us your perfect day. What does that look like?
Perfect day. Probably a hike in the morning. Being in nature does amazing things as far as stress levels go. Kind of a gentle hike. Coffee followed by, I don't know, a little research on my laptop in a coffee shop. And then maybe later glass of wine and cook a meal from scratch with my dog in the kitchen, snorting around.
Nice. That sounds so nice. And everybody, go ahead and check out Cory's meals. They are amazing in your pictures and your on Instagram and your stories.
Oh, thank
Uh,
you.
and then lastly, what's something you're really loving right now? It could be absolutely anything.
I recently discovered, and I've been kind of obsessed with Kite Hill almond milk yogurt. I think it's almond milk, and I love it because they have a Greek style. So it's a dairy-free yogurt that has probiotics, and it's got about 12 grams of protein in a serving. So for people who are lactose intolerant, can't eat dairy, it's a really great product. And I eat it sometimes, just other than my regular yogurt because I like the taste so much. So I've been kind of obsessed with that recently. I've been eating a lot of it.
That sounds good.
Yeah.
It's a really high protein for an almond milk product, I think. Usually they're not
It
very high in
is.
protein.
Yeah, and it's got tons of probiotics. So again, digestion is probiotics are essential for digestion. So
Hmm.
for good digestion, especially in periods of recovery. So you want to make sure you're getting a lot of probiotics.
That's true. All right. Thank you so much. So now if there's anyone who'd like to check out your website, your brand new website, it's only like a week old, right? And your Instagram,
Couple weeks.
where can they find you?
My website is thewomensdietitian.com, and my Instagram is the same. It's the Women's Dietitian. So yeah, you can
Okay.
check it out there.
Yes, I'm gonna link to both of these places on my blog. And thank you so much for chatting with me and sharing everything you know about food and intolerances and HA and all that fun stuff. So thank you.
Thank you for having me, Kristen. Have a good day.
Bye.